Have you ever noticed the nicest person in the room is often the most exhausted one? They smile the most but sleep the least. They help everyone but secretly feel helpless inside. And today, I want to tell you something that might shock you. Being too nice might be silently destroying your life. Stay with me till the end because the last few lessons will truly change your perspective on kindness, courage, and self-respect. My dear friends, many of you watching this right now are good people. You don't like conflict. You avoid hurting others. You say yes even when your heart is screaming no. You were told growing up, be nice, don't argue, adjust, sacrifice. And somewhere along the way, you started believing that your goodness depends on your ability to keep everyone happy. But let me ask you something honestly. When was the last time you kept yourself happy? There's a difference between being kind and being afraid to disappoint people. And today, we are going on a journey, 7 powerful lessons, to understand how being too nice slowly erodes your confidence, your boundaries, your peace, and sometimes even your identity. Let's begin. There is a silent epidemic in today's world. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't show up in medical reports, but it quietly drains millions of people every single day. It is the habit of being nice without boundaries. From a young age, many of us were praised for being good. We were told, "What a sweet child, so obedient, so adjusting." And slowly, without realizing it, we equated goodness with self-sacrifice. We began believing that the more we ignored our own needs, the more valuable we became. But here is something most people discover too late. Kindness without boundaries is not kindness. It is self-neglect dressed up as virtue. Imagine you own a house, a beautiful house, and every day people knock on your door asking for something, a cup of sugar, a place to stay, a little help with their problems. And because you are kind, you open the door every time. You let them in. You give. You serve. You adjust. But what if they start entering without knocking? What if they rearrange your furniture? What if they eat your food and never replace it? If you never define where your house ends and where someone else's begins, don't be surprised when people forget it was your house to begin with. Your time is your house. Your energy is your house. Your emotional capacity is your house. And when you allow everyone unlimited access without filters, something very dangerous happens. You slowly move out of your own life. I once spoke to a young woman who was known in her friend circle as the reliable one. If anyone needed help moving apartments, she was there. If someone needed late-night emotional support, she was there. If a colleague needed their shift covered, she was there. But one evening she called me, exhausted. She said, "I feel invisible. Nobody asks how I am. Nobody checks if I'm okay." And I gently asked her, "Have you taught them to?" There was silence. You see, when you always show up as the strong one, the available one, the endlessly accommodating one, people assume you don't need support. They assume you have unlimited capacity, but you don't. You are human. There is a misconception that boundaries are walls, that if you set limits, you are pushing people away. No. Boundaries are doors with locks. They allow love to enter, but they prevent misuse. Without boundaries, your generosity becomes expectation. Without boundaries, your flexibility becomes exploitation. Without boundaries, your silence becomes permission. Think about your phone battery. Imagine if you never charged it. You just kept giving until it dropped to 1%. Eventually, it will shut down. Not because it hates serving you, but because it was never replenished. Your emotional life works the same way. If you say yes when you mean no, if you agree when you feel uncomfortable, if you commit when you are already overwhelmed, you are running on 1%. And here is the painful truth. The world rarely notices when you are drained. They only notice when you stop performing. That is when they say, "You've changed. You've changed." Because exhaustion forced you to. It is far healthier to choose your boundaries consciously than to wait for burnout to enforce them for you. Now, let me ask you something honestly. When someone asks you for a favor, what is your first instinct? Is it, "Do I have the capacity for this?" Or is it, "What will they think of me if I refuse?" That small difference determines the quality of your life. Being kind should come from abundance, not obligation. When you help someone because you genuinely want to, it feels light, it feels joyful, it feels aligned. But when you help someone because you're afraid of disappointing them, it feels heavy, it feels resentful, it feels forced. And that heaviness accumulates. Every unspoken no becomes emotional weight. Every suppressed discomfort becomes silent fatigue. Every ignored need becomes inner distance from yourself. Over time, you stop recognizing your own desires. You become so skilled at adjusting that you forget what your original shape looked like. And this is where the real damage begins. Not outside, but inside. Because when you constantly abandon yourself, your self-respect quietly weakens. And when self-respect weakens, confidence follows. You start questioning your worth. You start feeling overlooked. You start wondering why others don't prioritize you. But how can they if you never do? Kindness must include you. Let me repeat that. Kindness must include you. If you remove yourself from the equation, it is not kindness. It is self-azure. The healthiest relationships in the world are not built on endless sacrifice. They are built on mutual respect. And respect begins the moment you demonstrate that your time, your energy, and your emotions are valuable. When you start saying, "I can't do this right now," when you start saying, "I need rest," when you start saying, "I'm not comfortable with that," you are not becoming rude. You are becoming responsible. Responsible for your well-being. Responsible for your energy. Responsible for your peace. And here is the beautiful irony. When you honor yourself, others learn to honor you too. Because people often follow the standard you set. If you treat yourself as optional, the world will treat you as optional. If you treat yourself as valuable, the world begins to notice. So today, I invite you to reflect. Where are you overextending? Where are you silently tired? Where are you saying yes while your heart whispers no? Start there. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with awareness. Because the journey from being too nice to being wisely kind begins with one realization: you cannot pour from an empty cup. And protecting your cup is not selfish, it is sacred. Let us now go deeper. Because if the first lesson was about boundaries, this one is about something even more subtle. Most people who are too nice don't realize that their behavior is not coming from love. It is coming from fear. And fear is a very clever actor. It disguises itself as politeness, as humility, as goodness. But underneath it, there is anxiety. Anxiety of being disliked. Anxiety of being rejected. Anxiety of someone saying, "You've changed." Let me tell you a story. There was a young man who always agreed with his friends. If they wanted Italian food, he loved Italian. If they wanted hiking, he loved hiking. If they criticized someone unfairly, he nodded along. One day I asked him, "What do you actually like?" He paused. He genuinely did not know, because he had spent years adjusting his preferences to match the room. His identity had become flexible clay, shaped by whoever stood in front of him. And the reason was simple. He was terrified of not belonging. Many of us operate from this invisible fear that if we express disagreement, we will lose connection. So we laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We agree with opinions we don't believe in. We tolerate behavior that hurts us. And we call it maturity. But let us be honest. Is it maturity or insecurity? When you say yes while your stomach tightens, that's not kindness, that's fear. When you stay silent while being disrespected, that's not peace, that's avoidance. When you overcommit because you don't want to disappoint, that's not generosity, that's anxiety. Fear-based niceness is exhausting because it constantly scans for approval. It asks, are they happy with me? Did I say the right thing? Will they still like me? And this mental monitoring never stops. It's like walking into every room with a mirror. Roar, checking how you're being perceived instead of how you're being authentic. And here's the irony. The more you chase approval, the more anxious you become. Because approval is unpredictable. Some people will like you, some won't. And no amount of over-adjusting can control that. I once met a woman who said, I just want everyone to like me. I smiled gently and said, even the people you don't like. But that's the contradiction. We exhaust ourselves trying to win the validation of people whose validation we don't even respect. Let that sink in. When fear drives your niceness, your decisions are no longer rooted in values. They are rooted in avoidance. You avoid conflict. You avoid awkward conversations. But avoiding short-term discomfort often creates long-term damage. Imagine you have a small crack in the wall of your home. It's uncomfortable to deal with it. So you ignore it. You paint over it. You decorate around it. But cracks don't disappear because you avoid them. They expand. In the same way, every avoided boundary becomes a bigger emotional crack. And the longer you postpone honest conversations, the heavier your internal pressure becomes. Now here is something powerful to understand. Rejection is not as dangerous as we imagine. Our minds treat rejection like a life-threatening event, but in reality, it is simply information. If someone distances themselves because you said no respectfully, what does that tell you? It tells you that their connection was conditional on your compliance. And that is not a healthy connection to preserve. Healthy relationships can handle disagreement. Healthy friendships can handle boundaries. Healthy love can handle honesty. If a relationship collapses the moment you stop overgiving, it was not built on mutual respect. It was built on your sacrifice. Let me ask you something. Have you ever agreed to something and immediately regretted it? That sinking feeling in your chest, that voice inside saying, why did I say yes again? That voice is your truth. But fear spoke louder in that moment. Fear said, if you refuse, they'll think you're rude. But what if they don't? And even if they do, is temporary misunderstanding worse than permanent self-betrayal? Here is the deeper truth. You don't need everyone to approve of you to be worthy. You don't need universal acceptance to be valuable. The strongest trees in the forest don't bend for every gust of wind. They sway, but they remain rooted. When you are rooted in your values, you don't need constant validation. You can say, I understand your perspective, but I see it differently. You can say, I'm not comfortable with that. You can say, I won't be able to commit to this. And the world doesn't collapse. In fact, something surprising happens. You begin to feel lighter because every time you act from courage instead of fear, you reclaim a small piece of yourself. Fear-based niceness shrinks you. Courage-based kindness strengthens you. And there is a massive difference between the two. One comes from insecurity, the other comes from inner stability. One asks, will they still like me? The other asks, am I still aligned with myself? My dear friends, the goal is not to become harsh, not to become indifferent. The goal is to shift your motivation. Help because you want to, not because you're afraid. Agree because you believe it, not because you're anxious. Stay because it's healthy, not because you fear being alone. And here is something beautiful. The moment you stop chasing approval, you start attracting respect. Because confidence is magnetic. Not loud confidence, not arrogant confidence, but quiet, grounded self-assurance. The kind that says, I value you and I value myself too. That balance is powerful. So today, notice your yes. Is it coming from love or is it coming from fear? That awareness alone can change your entire life. Now we enter a very delicate space. Because if fear is the seed, resentment is the fruit. When you keep saying yes while meaning no, when you keep smiling while feeling uncomfortable, when you keep adjusting while feeling overlooked, something slowly begins to accumulate inside you. Not anger at first, just discomfort, then frustration, and eventually resentment. Resentment is one of the most dangerous emotions, not because it explodes loudly, but because it grows silently. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you are carrying a small pebble in your shoe. At first, it's irritating but manageable. You tell yourself, it's fine, I can handle it. You keep walking. But mile after mile, that tiny pebble begins to bruise your foot. What was once tolerable becomes painful. Unspoken emotions work the same way. The first time someone crosses a boundary and you say nothing, it feels small. The second time it feels heavier. By the 10th time you are emotionally limping. And the tragedy? The other person often has no idea, because you trained them to believe everything is fine. I once met a man who had supported his extended family financially for years. Whenever anyone needed money, he provided it. Whenever there was a crisis, he stepped in. But he never once expressed his own stress. He never once admitted that he felt overwhelmed. One day, during a minor disagreement, years of suppressed emotion exploded out of him. Words came out that shocked everyone, including himself. Later he said to me, I don't even recognize who I became in that moment. But that outburst didn't appear from nowhere. It was accumulated silence finally breaking. Here is what happens when you suppress emotions to maintain harmony. On the outside, you appear calm. On the inside, you begin keeping score. I was there for them. I sacrificed my time. They never appreciate me. And every time you overgive without acknowledgement, the emotional ledger grows heavier. But here is the hard truth. If you never communicated your expectations, how can you demand others meet them? Resentment often forms when we expect others to read minds we never opened. You cannot expect appreciation for sacrifices people never knew were sacrifices. This is why honesty is not optional in healthy relationships. When you say yes against your will, you are not being generous. You are planting future resentment. And resentment poisons connection. It changes your tone. It changes your energy. It changes your patience. You may still show up physically, but emotionally you begin withdrawing. Have you ever noticed how some people say, I'm fine, but their energy feels heavy? That is an unexpressed truth sitting between words. And here's something profound. Suppressed emotions don't disappear. That leaks indirectly. It leaks through sarcasm, through passive-aggressive comments, through sudden irritability over small things. You snap at someone for leaving dishes in the sink, but the reaction isn't about dishes. It's about 10 previous moments you swallowed. When you silence yourself repeatedly, your nervous system stays alert. You become hyper-aware of being used. You start anticipating disappointment. And that anticipation creates emotional distance. Now, let me ask you something gently. Have you ever felt tired of being the responsible one? Have you ever thought, Why do they always come to me? Have you ever felt invisible despite doing so much? That is resentment knocking on your heart. And resentment is often a sign that you have been neglecting your own voice. You see, healthy kindness feels light. It does not feel like obligation. It does not feel like pressure. It does not feel like a burden. The moment giving starts feeling heavy, it is time to pause and ask, am I giving freely or am I giving to avoid discomfort? Because every avoided conversation today becomes an emotional confrontation tomorrow. Let me share something simple but powerful. When someone asks you for something and you feel hesitation, that hesitation is information. Instead of ignoring it, explore it. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I say no? Sometimes the fear is exaggerated, sometimes it is outdated, sometimes it is simply a habit. And when you start honoring that internal signal, something remarkable happens. Resentment decreases. Because resentment grows in silence, but it dissolves in clarity. Clarity doesn't mean aggression. It can be as simple as saying, I'm happy to help this time, but I may not always be available. Or, I'm feeling stretched right now. I need to prioritize some things. You will be surprised how often people respond with understanding. And if they don't, that tells you something important about the balance of that relationship. My dear friends, peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of honesty. When you suppress your truth to keep peace, you are not preserving harmony, you are postponing discomfort. And postponed discomfort always returns with interest. The goal is not to become confrontational. The goal is to become transparent. Transparent with yourself first. Because when you listen to your own emotions with respect, you prevent them from turning into bitterness. And life is too short to walk around with emotional bruises from pebbles you were too afraid to remove. So today, reflect. Where are you carrying silent frustration? Where are you overgiving without acknowledgement? Where are you smiling while feeling unseen? Remove the pebble. Speak gently. Speak clearly. Speak early. Before your silence turns into resentment. Before your kindness turns into bitterness. Before your heart hardens. Because you deserve relationships built on honesty, not hidden emotional debt. Because resentment is not just an emotion, it is a slow internal corrosion. And if we don't understand it fully, we will keep repeating the same pattern, being too nice on the outside while quietly breaking on the inside. Let me take you somewhere very honest. Resentment rarely begins with big betrayals. It doesn't start with dramatic events. It starts with small compromises. Tiny moments where you silence yourself. A friend makes a joke that hurts you, but you laugh along. A colleague dumps extra work on you, and you say, it's okay. A family member assumes your availability, and you rearrange your plans. Individually, these moments seem harmless, but your nervous system is recording everything. Every time you betray your truth, your body registers it. Your chest tightens, your stomach contracts. Your mind whispers, this doesn't feel right. And when that whisper is ignored repeatedly, it stops whispering. It starts building pressure. Resentment is accumulated self-abandonment. Let that sink in. When you consistently abandon your needs, your boundaries, your voice, a part of you feels unseen. And that unseen part doesn't disappear. It waits. I once met a woman who had been in a relationship for 8 years. She described herself as easygoing. She never complained. She adjusted to her partner's schedule. She suppressed her preferences. She told me proudly, we never fight. But when I asked, do you ever disagree? Her eyes shifted. Eventually she admitted, I don't say things that might create tension. 8 years of unspoken tension. And then, one day, something small triggered her. A forgotten anniversary dinner. And suddenly years of suppressed emotions poured out, not in clarity but in chaos. Her partner was shocked. Why didn't you say something earlier? But she couldn't answer because she had convinced herself that silence was maturity. My dear friends, silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is postponed truth. And postponed truth gathers emotional interest. Let me explain something very important about the psychology of resentment. When you give more than you genuinely want to give, your mind creates an unconscious contract. It says, because I sacrificed, they owe me. Even if you never say it aloud, even if you never consciously think it, your heart keeps score. You expect appreciation. You expect reciprocity. You expect acknowledgement. And when those expectations are not met, resentment deepens. But here is the painful twist. The other person may not even know there was a sacrifice. You said yes. You smiled. You reassured them it was fine. So from their perspective, everything was fine. Resentment grows strongest when there is a gap between what you feel and what you communicate. You feel overwhelmed, but you say you're okay. You feel hurt, but you say it doesn't matter. You feel tired, but you say you can handle it. Over time, this gap becomes emotional distance, and that distance creates loneliness. Have you ever felt lonely even when surrounded by people? That often happens when you are not being emotionally honest, because connection requires authenticity, and authenticity requires expression. Without expression, relationships become performances. You perform helpfulness, you perform patience, you perform flexibility. But internally, you are screaming for acknowledgement, and the longer you perform, the more exhausted you become. Now let us talk about something subtle. Resentment doesn't just affect how you see others, it affects how you see yourself. You begin thinking, why am I always the one adjusting? Why do I allow this? Why can't I just say no? And that self-questioning slowly turns into self-criticism. You start blaming yourself for your own silence. And now you are carrying resentment toward others and disappointment toward yourself. That is a heavy emotional load. And here is where it becomes dangerous. Unresolved resentment often transforms into passive aggression. Instead of direct communication, you use sarcasm. Instead of honest boundaries, you withdraw affection. Instead of clarity, you give mixed signals. And then relationships become confusing battlefields. The other person senses something is wrong, but doesn't know what. You feel wronged, but haven't articulated why. And slowly, trust erodes. All because of unexpressed truth. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you said, "That hurt me"? When was the last time you said, "I'm not comfortable with this"? When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel inconvenience without immediately overriding it? Many too nice people are deeply uncomfortable with being perceived as difficult, so they avoid anything that might create tension. But here is a life-changing realization. Short-term tension prevents long-term resentment. Healthy conflict strengthens relationships. Avoided conflict weakens them. Imagine a pressure cooker. If you never release steam, what happens? Eventually, it explodes. Resentment is that steam. And emotional explosions often shock the people around you because they only saw your calm exterior. But you were not calm. You were contained. Contained pressure is not peace. Now let's go even deeper. Why do we suppress emotions in the first place? Often it begins in childhood. Maybe you learned that expressing anger was unacceptable. Maybe you were praised for being low maintenance. Maybe conflict in your home felt unsafe, so you adapted. You learned that love equals compliance. But adulthood requires unlearning that survival strategy. Because what protected you once may now be limiting you. If you constantly prioritize harmony over honesty, you will slowly feel invisible. And invisibility breeds bitterness. But here is the beautiful part. Resentment is not your enemy. It is information. It is your internal alarm system saying something is out of alignment. Instead of judging resentment, get curious about it. Ask yourself, what boundary was crossed? What expectation was unspoken? What need was ignored? Resentment often points directly to neglected boundaries. And boundaries are not demands for others to change. They are commitments to yourself. For example, instead of thinking, they never appreciate me, ask, have I expressed that I need acknowledgement? Have I communicated my limits clearly? This shift is empowering because resentment keeps you in victim mode. Responsibility moves you into growth mode. Now, let's address something very honest. Sometimes people will take advantage. Not everyone will respond beautifully to your new clarity. But that information is valuable because when you stop overgiving, the relationships that were built only on your sacrifice will feel uncomfortable. And that discomfort is not failure, it is revelation. Healthy connections adapt to honesty, unhealthy ones resist it. If a relationship weakens because you expressed a boundary respectfully, it was already fragile. You were just holding it together with your silence. And that is exhausting work. My dear friends, your emotions are not inconveniences, they are guidance. If you feel irritation repeatedly around someone, don't ignore it. Explore it. If you feel drained after certain interactions, don't dismiss it. Reflect on it. Your body speaks before your mind does. Resentment is simply your body saying, I need protection. And protection does not mean aggression. It means communication. Clear, calm, compassionate communication. For example, I value helping you, but I also need balance. I felt hurt when that happened. I can't commit to this right now. Notice something powerful here. None of these statements attack. They simply express. An expression dissolves accumulation. The more frequently you express small discomforts, the less likely they are to grow into large resentments. It's like cleaning your home regularly instead of waiting for it to become overwhelming. Small emotional cleanups prevent emotional chaos. And here is the freedom waiting on the other side. When you stop suppressing your truth, your relationships become lighter. You no longer feel like you are carrying invisible weight. You no longer feel unseen. You no longer feel like the strong one who secretly struggles. Because you allow yourself to be human. And humanity includes needs. It includes limits. It includes vulnerability. You do not have to earn love by tolerating discomfort. You do not have to secure connection by silencing your feelings. And you certainly do not have to sacrifice your peace to preserve someone else's comfort. Let me leave you with this reflection. If you keep watering others while neglecting your own roots, eventually you will dry out. Resentment is dryness of the soul. Honest communication is water. So ask yourself today, where am I silently keeping score? Where am I pretending it's okay when it's not? Where am I carrying emotional pebbles that need removal? Do not wait for explosion. Do not wait for burnout. Do not wait until bitterness changes your personality. Speak early. Speak gently. Speak clearly. Because your voice, expressed in truth, is far more powerful than your silence disguised as kindness.